You ever get that feeling like, those invisible forces inside you just kind of pulling you in different directions?
Yeah.
Well, today we are taking a deep dive into this framework from Islamic thought, and it really puts words to those inner struggles.
Yeah.
We're talking about these 6 internal enemies.
Oh, wow.
We're going to explore how this concept helps us understand our personal battles,
Okay.
maybe even find some pathways to overcome them.
Oh.
And hey, even if, Islamic beliefs aren't really your thing,
Yeah.
these ideas can be, surprisingly relatable.
Yeah.
And offer some pretty valuable insights for anyone, just looking to level up their self-awareness.
Right.
We'll be drawing from excerpts from this book called The 6 Internal Enemies, Overcoming Vice in Islam.
Okay.
So it's not just a list of, bad behaviors.
It's not. It's more about digging deeper.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that it's about understanding the roots of our negative actions, recognizing those kind of subtle, often subconscious tendencies within us that can, they can lead us astray from a path of, genuine growth, both spiritually and morally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So less about being a good or bad person,
Yeah.
more about understanding the why behind our not so ideal moments.
Exactly.
So what exactly are these 6 internal enemies?
Okay.
What are we
So
wrestling with here?
picture this. 6 forces that are constantly kind of at play within you. Each one wants control,
Okay.
and they're all interconnected, so one can easily feed another.
Oh,
These forces, or enemies as they're called,
all right.
they are desire, anger, greed, attachment, pride, and then what's often translated as either heedlessness or intoxication.
Okay, whoa, intoxication. That's a heavy one as an internal enemy.
It is an interesting one.
That's intriguing.
Yeah.
But let's start with desire. I mean, we all have desires, right? Ambition, wanting things. Like, that new gadget or, the drive to succeed.
Absolutely.
These aren't always a bad thing. In fact, doesn't a lot of good come from those very desires?
A lot of good comes from those very desires, yeah. But it's about understanding when that ambition crosses the line.
Okay.
Those times when unchecked desires,
Right.
lead us to actions that might harm ourselves or others.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the Islamic perspective kind of emphasizes this idea, pursue desires, but make sure you're pursuing them through ethical and permissible means.
So it's not like denying our desires altogether. It's more about being mindful
That's right.
of how we go about fulfilling them.
Exactly.
So instead of just asking, do I want this?
Right.
You're saying we should be asking, is this something I can pursue in a way that aligns with my values
Yeah,
and doesn't step on anyone's toes along the way?
exactly. And there's actually a Quranic verse that kind of speaks to this directly. Allah has forbidden you from what is unlawful. And so that really highlights the importance of aligning your actions with kind of like a greater moral compass, if you will.
It makes me think about how often we try to justify those questionable actions because we have this deep desire for something.
Yeah.
We say things like, well, everyone's doing it, or it's
Okay.
just a little white lie.
Sure.
So are there specific practices in Islam that, can help people navigate those morally gray areas?
There are, yeah.
And keep their desires in check?
There are. The practice of fasting during Ramadan,
Okay.
which is specifically designed to cultivate self-discipline
Right.
and control over your desires.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reminder that we're not slaves to those cravings.
Right.
And that we actually can choose to abstain from those things, even the basic needs.
Wow.
Like food and water.
Interesting. So it's like a spiritual boot camp for your willpower.
Yeah.
You
right.
face that struggle head on and you learn to make conscious choices, right?
Right. You're not giving in to every single impulse.
That comes your way.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
could see how that would be really powerful, even, outside of a religious context.
Absolutely. It's all about building that muscle
Yeah.
of self-control,
Yeah.
aligning your actions with your higher values.
Okay. So we've tackled desire, but I'm guessing this could be linked to our next enemy, anger.
Okay.
I mean, think about how often we get angry when we don't get what we desire, right?
Sure.
Like road rage when someone cuts you off.
Yeah.
Or snapping at a loved one after a long day.
Yes, of course. Of course.
Pretty sure we've all been there.
Absolutely. And those are just everyday examples.
Yeah.
Anger, it can be
Right.
incredibly destructive,
Oh, yeah.
especially when it escalates into, violence or aggression.
Sure.
Islam places a very strong emphasis on patience
Okay.
and self-control as antidotes to anger. It's not about pretending we don't get angry.
Right.
It's about recognizing that anger, it's natural.
Sure.
It's a human emotion. But
We have a responsibility to manage it.
okay.
We can't let it control us.
So it's not about pretending we don't get angry. It's about choosing how we respond to that anger.
Exactly.
Are there teachings in Islam that kind of, offer guidance on how to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah, the Quran and also the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, offer lots of strategies
Okay.
for managing anger.
Mm.
One beautiful hadith, it states, whoever controls his anger, Allah will grant him peace in his heart.
That's beautiful. It's like that old saying, you can't stop the birds from flying overhead, but you can stop them from building a nest in your hair.
Right. Exactly.
Exactly.
Anger might show up.
Sure.
We have the power to decide whether we let it take root
You got it.
and, control us.
And there's practical tips too.
Oh, okay.
Like if you feel anger rising,
Right.
physically removing yourself from the situation,
Okay.
deep breaths,
Yeah.
or even, performing ritual ablution, washing your face and hands to cool down. That makes a lot of sense. Shifting your physical state can definitely, help break that emotional momentum.
Absolutely.
And I'm already seeing how these enemies are like intertwined, right?
Yeah.
Like unchecked desire can lead to anger
Yes.
when those desires are frustrated.
They feed into each other. Yeah, exactly.
Slippery slope.
And speaking of slippery slopes,
Yeah.
let's talk about greed.
Okay.
This one feels particularly relevant in today's world, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Consumerism is constantly
Oh,
telling
yeah.
us we need more, more, more.
Yes. Greed seems to be at the root of so many issues, like economic inequality, environmental damage,
Yeah,
even conflict and war, when you think about it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So the Islamic perspective on greed is really centered around this idea of contentment.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that true wealth, it doesn't lie in material possessions,
Mm-hmm.
but rather in spiritual richness and your connection with the divine. It's about focusing on the eternal rewards of the afterlife,
Okay.
rather than getting caught up in the fleeting nature of worldly wealth.
So shifting the focus from how much can I accumulate
Right.
to how much meaning and purpose can I bring into my life and the lives of others?
Exactly.
It's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. But it's a perspective
Yeah.
that can bring a lot of peace and liberation.
Right.
The Quran, it actually reminds us, for those who believe and do good deeds, there is a reward that will never fade. The emphasis is on living a life of purpose and meaning,
Yeah.
not on just, stockpiling possessions.
This makes me think about the concept of zakat,
Yes.
one of the pillars of Islam,
Yes.
right, where you're obligated to give a portion of your wealth to charity.
Exactly.
Isn't that kind of a direct counter to greed?
It is. Zakat is a powerful practice that not only, helps those in need,
Right.
but it also purifies the wealth of the giver.
Oh, wow.
It's a reminder that our possessions aren't truly ours.
Hmm.
They're a gift from God,
Okay.
and we have a responsibility to share them with others.
That's so different from, like, the message we usually get from society,
It is.
where it's all about acquiring more and more for ourselves.
Right.
So how can we, regardless of our beliefs,
Yeah.
start to challenge that?
That's a great question,
Yeah.
and one that we'll definitely dive into deeper, a bit later.
Okay.
But I think for now, it starts with being mindful of our intentions.
Okay.
Why are we pursuing something?
Yeah.
Is it truly something that we need?
Right.
Or are we just trying to fill a void?
Mm.
Are we looking for happiness in material things?
Yeah.
Or are we searching for something deeper,
Mm-hmm.
like meaning and purpose?
It's about asking ourselves those tough questions, right?
It is. It is.
And being honest with the answers.
Yeah.
Because maybe what we're really craving isn't, a bigger house or a fancier car, but something much deeper, like connection, purpose, belonging. And speaking of deep connections, that leads us perfectly into our next enemy, attachment.
Yes. We often think about attachment in terms of our relationships with people, but it's a lot deeper than that.
Okay.
We can be attached to possessions.
Right.
We can be attached to certain outcomes, even to our own ideas and beliefs.
It's like those times when you get so fixated on like a specific goal or a
Yeah.
specific outcome that you just like lose sight of everything else.
Right.
Or when you're so attached to a certain belief that you just refuse to consider
Right.
any other perspectives.
Exactly.
Can you talk more about how Islam views this type of attachment?
Sure. So the Islamic perspective recognizes that attachments are a natural part of life.
Right.
We're human beings, after all.
Of course.
But the danger lies in
Yeah.
excessive attachment.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
can distract us from our spiritual purpose
Right.
and our connection with the divine. When we cling too tightly to anything in this world,
Yeah.
it becomes a barrier between us and God.
It's like those attachments become idols in a way, right?
Yeah,
We start to worship them instead of focusing on our relationship
exactly.
with the divine.
And there's a powerful verse in the Quran
Mm-hmm.
that speaks directly to this. Do not be so engrossed in the love of your children and wealth that they become a barrier between you and the remembrance of Allah.
Whoa, that's a pretty strong statement.
It is.
It's a reminder that even the things we love most,
Yeah.
our families, our possessions, they can hold us back if we let them. So how do we balance those like natural feelings of love and attachment
Right.
with the need to stay connected to that, like, to our spiritual core?
That is a profound question, and one that requires constant introspection and effort, I think. But a key principle in Islam that helps us navigate this is, the concept of tawakkul, which means reliance on God.
Okay.
It's about acknowledging that ultimately everything is in God's hands
Hmm.
and surrendering to his will.
So it's about letting go of that need to control everything.
Yeah.
Trusting that even when things don't go according to our plan, there's this like higher purpose at play.
That's right. And that doesn't mean that we just become passive.
Right.
We still, we still strive and we make an effort,
Of course.
but we do so with a sense of detachment from the outcome. We know that God has our best interests at heart.
It takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
Knowing you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders.
It does. It's very liberating.
Yeah.
This sense of tawakkul.
Right.
And it allows us to, experience love and attachment in a healthier way.
Okay.
Cherishing our relationships, appreciating our blessings,
Right.
without becoming consumed by them, without letting them control us.
That makes so much sense. It's not about denying those human connections. It's about approaching them from a place of balance and trust. This has given me a lot to think about already, but I think we need a moment to process all of this.
Yeah.
We've covered 3 of the 6 internal enemies: desire, anger, and greed. And I'm already seeing how they're all like interconnected,
They are.
like threads in a tapestry.
They are, very much so.
Rude.
You've just scratched the surface here.
Okay.
But before we get to the next 3,
Right.
attachment, pride, and heedlessness,
Yeah.
why don't you, the listener, take a moment
Yeah.
and just kind of reflect on what resonated with you most from this first part of our deep dive?
Sure.
Which of these enemies, do you find yourself wrestling with the most?
Right.
What are some steps that you can take to, start understanding and managing them?
Yeah.
We're going to pick this conversation back up in part 2, where we're going to explore these internal struggles even more
Okay.
and hopefully find some practical ways to overcome them.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the 6 internal enemies,
Yeah.
since our last conversation.
I've been thinking a lot about how, these ancient concepts are so relevant to our lives today.
It is pretty amazing.
It's like having this new lens
Yeah.
to view my own struggles and even those of the world around me.
It's really fascinating how these timeless wisdom traditions, they just speak to something so fundamental
Yeah,
about the human experience.
totally. And we've only just begun.
I know, right?
Last time we left off talking about attachment and how even the things we love can become obstacles on our spiritual path
All right.
if we're not careful.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to hear more about
Yeah.
practical ways to actually cultivate a healthier relationship with attachment.
Well, it is a journey.
Yeah.
It requires constant awareness, but a key principle in Islam that can help us navigate this is the concept of tawakkul,
Okay.
which means reliance on God.
Right. Reliance on God.
It's about acknowledging that ultimately everything is in God's hands and surrendering to his will. So letting go of that need to control everything.
Yeah.
Having faith that even when things don't go according to plan, there's this higher purpose at play.
Exactly.
But does that mean that we just sit back and become passive, just waiting for things to happen?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's about finding a balance
Yeah.
between striving and surrender.
Okay.
We still put in the effort.
Yeah.
We set goals, we work towards our dreams,
Right.
but we do so with a sense of detachment from the outcome, knowing that God has our best interests at heart.
It takes the pressure off, right?
It does.
Knowing that you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulder.
It really does.
That you're not solely responsible for making everything go right.
Exactly. And this sense of tawakkul can be so incredibly liberating.
Yeah.
It allows us to experience love and attachment in a much healthier way,
Okay.
cherishing our relationships,
Right.
appreciating our blessings without becoming consumed by them or letting them control us.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So it's not about denying those human connections.
Right.
It's about approaching them from a place of balance and trust.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about letting go of the need to control outcomes, but what about those times when our attachments are to,
Yeah.
very specific things or people?
Sure.
How do we loosen that grip without feeling like we're losing something precious?
We have to remember the goal isn't to eliminate attachment altogether.
Okay.
That's,
Right.
that's not realistic.
Yeah.
It's probably not even desirable.
Right.
It's more about recognizing when that attachment has become excessive, when it's causing us more pain than joy,
Right.
when it's holding us back from growth.
So it's about becoming aware of the difference between healthy attachment,
Yeah.
which brings joy and connection,
Yeah.
and unhealthy attachment, which leads to suffering and stagnation.
Think about it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Healthy attachment is like holding a bird gently in your hand.
Okay.
You appreciate its beauty, you care for it,
Right.
but you also give it the freedom to fly.
Hmm.
Unhealthy attachment is like clutching that bird so tightly
Yeah.
that you crush it, you suffocate it.
Wow. That's a powerful image.
Yeah,
It really highlights the importance of finding that delicate balance.
it does.
Okay, so we've explored attachment in detail,
Mm-hmm.
but now I'm curious how this concept of the 6 internal enemies
Yeah,
relates to other spiritual traditions or philosophies.
right.
Is this just an Islamic thing?
Sure.
Or are there similar ideas in other belief systems?
That's a great question. And what's so fascinating is that while this framework comes from Islamic thought,
Yeah.
you'll find similar concepts in a lot of other traditions.
Mm,
The names and the specifics might be a little different,
right.
but the core idea is consistent.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Okay, well, in Christianity, you have the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah.
Pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overlap there.
Yeah, there is.
And in Buddhism, you have the concept of kleshas,
Okay.
which are mental states that cloud the mind
Right.
and lead to suffering.
Hmm.
And these include things like attachment, aversion, ignorance, and pride.
So it's like all these different traditions
Yeah.
are pointing to the same fundamental human struggle,
Yes.
just using different language and different metaphors.
Exactly. And that speaks to how universal these challenges are.
Mm,
We all face these inner battles, regardless of our background or beliefs.
right.
It's part of the human condition.
So even though these 6 internal enemies are presented as, enemies,
Yeah.
it sounds like they can also be seen as opportunities for growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're not something to be feared or ashamed of.
Right.
They're simply part of who we are.
Yeah.
By understanding them,
Yeah.
we can start to make more conscious choices,
Okay.
recognize when we're being influenced by them, and choose to respond in a different way.
It's like they're signposts pointing out areas where we need to do some inner work.
That is a great way to put it.
Yeah,
And it's a lifelong process.
of course.
Battling these internal enemies, it's not a one-time event.
Yeah.
It's a journey of self-reflection and continuous effort.
So it's not about achieving some kind of perfection,
Right.
checking off a box and saying, okay, I've conquered anger.
Right.
It's more about, constantly striving to be the best versions of ourselves, acknowledging our flaws,
Yeah.
and actively working to overcome them.
Precisely. It's about embracing that journey, with all its ups and downs and finding the lessons in each experience.
I love that perspective.
Yeah.
It's so much more realistic
It is.
and, frankly, encouraging
Yes.
than this idea that we have to be perfect all the time.
Exactly.
Okay, now I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier
Sure.
about these enemies being interconnected.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah.
Because I'm really starting to see how they all kind of weave together.
Absolutely. Think of them as a web,
Okay.
each enemy influencing and reinforcing the others. For instance, we already talked about how unchecked desire can lead to anger
Right.
when those desires are frustrated,
Of course.
but it can also lead to greed, right?
Totally. Like if I'm constantly desiring more and more,
Yeah.
It's so easy to slip into that mindset of greed.
It is.
Always wanting what I don't have, never feeling satisfied with what I do have.
Exactly. And then you add pride into the mix.
Oh, yeah.
If you're blinded by pride,
Right.
it becomes even harder to see your own flaws.
Sure.
Recognize when you're being controlled by desire or greed. You might even start to justify your actions.
Yeah.
Convincing yourself that you deserve more.
Right.
That you're entitled to certain things.
It's like a recipe for disaster.
It can feel that way for sure.
One enemy feeding the next, creating this downward spiral.
Right. But the good news is, by recognizing these interconnections, we can actually start to break free from that cycle.
Okay.
By working on one enemy, we indirectly weaken the hold of the others.
Okay. That gives me some hope.
Yeah.
So it's not about tackling them all at once,
Right.
but about finding like those key leverage points,
Yes.
recognizing where we're most vulnerable and focusing our energy there.
You got it.
Okay.
It's about choosing our battles wisely.
Yeah.